Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
Andy, it has been like a month, 2 months since we've talked. We've talked on here.
It has. I've been on other people's podcasts more than I've been on my own podcast over the holiday season.
So I need to ask you then. I mean, do you want to come back to this one?
Well, I thought we were going to have this discussion before we started recording,
Yeah.
Chris.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, you have to hand in your 2 weeks notice, I guess, so we can get one more episode out. Yeah, it's really cool. I listened to the episode that you were on, Splat Book, where you talked about the John Carpenter. Is it
Oh,
the
yeah.
Apocalypse trilogy? Yeah.
Yep.
And that one finally forced me to watch The Thing.
Okay.
So I've sent messages to you and to John and stuff separately about this. You know, John, who's one of the co-hosts of Splatbook. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed The Thing. I don't know why I waited this long in my life to watch it, but yeah, it was an incredible movie. Like, I'm not a horror person at all, but like this movie, I mean, I guess I would classify it as horror, but it's very much like more of like an adventure, maybe like a thriller or something like that. But yeah, it was really good. I liked it a lot.
That's interesting you would describe it that way. And we don't have to deep dive into The Thing again, because in the last 2 months I've really have talked and thought about The Thing more than I have like in my entire life up to this point. But
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I think everyone would call that a horror movie. So it's kind of interesting to me, especially given how gory and gruesome it is at points, that it felt to you more adventure-y or thriller-y.
I think there is. So for me, when I think about horror movies, I think about stuff that genuinely scares me. And there's something about The Thing where like they can combat it with physical force. Right. So yeah, like, you know, The Thing, right? I guess if you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's really good. And then you can go listen to the Splatbook episode where they discuss it. But like, you know, so there's this like alien thing that can kind of take over people's bodies, and like it can bring other like beings and stuff into itself, which basically just results in it making these really gross, ugly monsters and stuff. But you can kind of like kill them off with fire or like, you know, with force and stuff like that. So for me, it's like, okay, well, I understand like how to handle that. Whereas something like, say, like the Babadook, you know, or like these other like monster movies where there's no real way to kill it other than maybe calling in like the full might of the Catholic Church exorcism squad or whatever,
Yeah.
to get rid of it. It's like, for me, that really makes it a lot less scary.
It's funny, in kind of in the horror genre, there is really nothing quite so effective as setting the monster on fire, no matter what, what you're talking about. Like it might survive radiation, a nuclear explosion. It might survive all sorts of things, but if you can catch it on fire, it's probably going to die.
Yeah, which, I mean, there's a small comfort to that, I guess.
I guess it really is.
Yeah.
So yeah, my last question I want to ask you about The Thing, and then I'm sorry, dear listeners, if you have heard way more about The Thing than you really wanted to in the last few weeks. But I can't watch The Thing without my own like nostalgia and kind of meta awareness of The Thing being a part of that experience. And that's great. Yeah. But I was jealous of you when you said you were watching The Thing. And I think, you know, you had mostly avoided spoilers.
Yeah.
I mean, spoilers aren't that important in a movie like this, right? Because you know what you're getting. So I was jealous of you getting to watch this for the first time. But I was also kind of curious, because I was like, I felt like there's a 50% chance that Chris is going to come back and be like, that was the dumbest, like hokiest thing I've ever seen in my life. Yeah. So I'm glad that wasn't the case. But do you want to talk a little bit about what it was watching this like early 80s creature feature in whatever year it is right now?
Yeah, I think it's technically 2024, which just sounds impossible.
Okay, I never left 2020, so
right. Same here. Yeah, so I'm happy to kind of talk about that. So I was chatting with a friend. Yeah, we were on the sledding hill and we, you know, watching our kids go up and down the hill. So I mentioned that I'd watched it, and he just like lit up, and he like loves horror movies. So we started talking all about horror and stuff. But he mentioned that there is something about horror in particular is a very like communal thing. So if you were watching The Thing, the ideal way to watch that would be in a theater full of other people who are excited to watch The Thing.
Oh, yes. Yep.
So for me, watching this movie for the first time, like, you know, it's a movie you'd mentioned to me a bunch of times. You know, John's mentioned it to me. Like, it's and another friend, when I mentioned on the podcast that I hadn't watched it, I think the last episode that we recorded, the one with Toby, where we were talking about math and stuff, I just mentioned at the end that I hadn't seen the movie. He texted me immediately because he was listening to the podcast. He's like, you haven't seen The Thing? Like, you know, right? So it was, for me walking into this, it was a movie that I knew I was going to watch and then have to talk about with other people. And so even though I was watching it by myself, it ended up being this sort of communal experience where I was like, oh, I can't wait to tell Andy about this, you know,
Yeah.
because I know we're going to talk about it, right? Like, and I can't wait to tell him about that, right? Yeah, so despite sort of watching it by myself just on like a Tuesday night or whatever, right? You know, it ended up being this experience where I was like watching it with like an eye towards like getting through it, in that like, oh, I'm finally going to watch this movie that I know I should watch. I'm also going to get to talk about it with my friends, right? So that's sort of my baseline, is like I'm pretty
Yeah.
excited to watch this thing. But then for me, like the effects worked really well. Like I think I can kind of appreciate the craft that went into them, even if like maybe they looked a little hokey. Like it's still like surprising, right? It's still good camera work. It's still like, you know, they're still gross to sort of think about and imagine like that, you know. So I really enjoyed the effects, but then on top of that, then just like the acting is really good, and like the story is pretty interesting too, and you're sort of constantly guessing like, you know, who has been the thing you know, in this,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, in this scenario and stuff. And then the ending is a little bit vague, you know, so like I immediately wanted to talk to everybody about the ending. And it's like, yeah, it's a really like good movie. And I think I mentioned to you, if they were going to remake it, I wouldn't want them to. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing they could do to make it better. Yeah, like I'd still want them to cast Kurt Russell right in the lead.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yep.
if he's still, yeah, like, you know, it's just there's you know, it's just kind of like a perfect movie for what it was. I mean, I think
Yeah.
you could maybe argue that a different director might do the exact same script in a slightly different way or something like that. But it's like, yeah, it's like a solid movie. And then for me too, having watched other movies that have come since then and other TV shows and stuff, you can see all the different like references that people are making back to it. You know, especially
Mm-hmm.
like all of Carpenter's films, I think in general get referenced a lot. But like Stranger Things, for example, like I mean, yeah, like rips off so many so many shots and like ideas and stuff
Yeah.
from the thing. And like, you know, that's a show that I loved. And like to me, it's the references are fun. It's not like a, oh, I can't believe they stole from from John
Mm-hmm.
Carpenter. It's like, oh, like that's a really cool idea to kind of like bring this stuff in. Yeah, so I enjoyed it, and I don't know, I think if I hadn't enjoyed it, I wouldn't have told you maybe, because like I know it's a
Yeah.
movie that's near and dear to your heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. By the way, I don't
Yeah.
know if it's picking up on the mic, but I'm in a room with a bunch of guinea pigs. So
Oh
if
yeah.
there's like, they're pretty chattery this morning.
Yeah.
So if you hear a kind of a listeners, if there is a very low level guinea pig chattering noise, I'm not in a
Yeah.
rainforest. I'm not recording in
Okay.
a rainforest or anything. I'm
Yeah.
recording in the opposite of rainforest because I'm in Michigan right now,
Yes,
and
yeah, it is
just
deathly cold right now. Well, yeah, I
1,000
mean, if any of the
feet
guinea
of
pigs
snow.
start to like shoot out like tendrils of you know, like gross tentacles and stuff, and start, you know, screaming at you, you know, make sure you have some fire nearby.
Fire, that's all we need. Yep.
Yes, yeah.
So,
Uh
well, that's great. Hey, thanks
yeah.
for sharing
Yeah.
about the thing. I do think there is something communal, like you say, about horror stories or scary
Hmm.
stories in general that is not necessarily the case with other stories. I don't know if I want to make the generalization, but I would say I am more likely to want to watch a horror movie with friends than I am like a lot of other types of movie.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think
Yeah.
if that's really true or not, but I don't know. If I watch a great sci-fi movie, that doesn't seem like something I need to share with others, but I do, of the movies I watch with other people, they tend to be horror movies. And I don't know if that's just because I like horror movies, so most of the movies I'm watching are horror, or if there is that kind of instinct of like, let's all kind of freak ourselves out together in like the
Hmm.
safeness of a community together.
Yeah, yeah. Like there's a quote at the end of the last Splat book that, or I guess it was two episodes ago, where I think Matt read it about like what scares you scares me. Like that horror is sort of a universal thing. Like stuff that is scary, yeah, scary to you is gonna be scary to me. So I think there's something about like sitting in a theater or your living room, yeah, getting scared about the same stuff, realizing you're gonna get to the other side, and having that be a cathartic moment. Yeah, and to kind of like tie it back to gaming too. I mean, I think about like how many of the campaigns and one shots and stuff that I've run and played in end up having these horror elements to them. Because I think it is that same thing. You're like, you know, in a way, it's like this. It's like a safe way to interact with each other is to kind of like, well, let's see if we can like ratchet up the horror the horror of it, right? And then you can kind of deflate it with comedy, and like you go back and forth between these different modes and stuff. But I mean, I think it's like it's such a part of being human, right? Like, so I have a 3-year-old, right? And he's scared of stuff, right? So he woke up last night just terrified of something, and it's like just seeing that like terror and then calming down and like, that whole thing. Like, I think we sort of crave that too in our lives, as
Yeah.
well. I mean, it can definitely go some bad places, but I think, like, yeah, for at the game table and then movies and stuff like that, I mean, I think there really is something to that just idea of like, yeah, let's kind of scare each other scare each other a little bit, and then come out of it and we have bonded in a way.
Excellent. So, hey, I want to switch the topic a little
Yeah.
bit, and
Yeah,
can we talk Dungeons and Dragons for a few minutes?
Yes, we can. Yeah,
I don't know if you've heard about this
I have
game
not
called
heard about this game.
Dungeons
It
and Dragons.
sounds kind of weird.
So, when we are done recording this podcast, I'm going to stop recording and close the browser window, and I'm going to go in the other room, and I'm going to run Dungeons and Dragons for my family.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, I'm going to be running the Stormwreck Isle starter set or whatever. I think it's the new starter set, relatively new, that has replaced, for reasons that only make sense, I guess, to the people at Wizards of the Coast, has replaced the much beloved Phandelver starter set. So you have run this, or you've run parts of this, and can we just chat a little bit about how that adventure is? Let's talk about D&D's starter set right now.
Yeah.
So what do I have to look forward to? I mean, I've skimmed the adventure. It's pretty sparse, and maybe we can talk about the thinness of the material here as part of this conversation. So let's talk Stormwreck Isle. What can I expect?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the thinness of the material. It is, I think I said before we kind of jumped online, it's sort of like it is the baby D&D for babies of adventures.
That's a hot take there. I can see that.
I know, right? That's the hottest take I will probably ever have about Dungeons and Dragons. But
right.
Yeah, so like Lost Mines of Phandelver, like I think anyone who's played it has probably enjoyed it. Like I've run it a couple times, parts of it a couple times, and like the whole thing, at least once and stuff. It's like it's a good adventure, and they've used it as sort of the basis of a new adventure module, right, that they put out recently, right? Like I think it's called the Shattered Obelisk. I have bought it. I honestly have not cracked it open since I bought it, which it's probably a problem. But so like that one's pretty good. Stormwreck Isle, I don't think anyone's going to be like, wow, that was the best the best D&D I've ever played. Yeah, so you sort of just like wake up on an island, like, so it's very, very contained. It's very, I think, purposely does not allow you to just be like anywhere you want on the Sword Coast, for example, right? So you have like, I think it's a settlement of kobolds, right? And like they have sort of a threat that they need taken care of, and there's a handful of directions you can take from there. I think when I ran it, we just played one session, so they got to the island, they figured out what was going on, and then they decided to go to, there was a shipwreck that they went to. I mean, like, it's good, right? It's pretty good. I think like your players, your family, right, will have stuff that they want to glom onto. I mean, I think the thing that I would tell you is definitely riff on it as much as you can. I would not just run it as written, because I think it'll be pretty thin, as you mentioned. I would just introduce sort of anything that kind of makes you more interested in the adventure. Go ahead and introduce it. I think you can find a way to weave it in pretty easily. The thing that really stuck out to me is that there is not as much combat in it as you might think there would be for D&D. I think there's an optional like zombie encounter right at the beginning of it. I think I might make that, well, if your family's played D&D before, so you can probably skip that. If I was going to run this for a brand new group again, I would make them have to have that encounter, because otherwise you sort of end up doing a lot of talking for the first part of it.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the structure of this adventure, and maybe how it compares to kind of an ideal D&D adventure that you might put together. Because this module, it wisely starts with an action scene. I would say getting attacked by like 3 zombies is pretty low on the excitement scale, but like that. But I am a jaded gamer.
Yes, you are.
Right?
Yes, yeah.
Then you get dumped. From what I can tell, you get dumped into a town, and for me, scenes at the beginning of an adventure where you get assigned like a job by somebody, that's a yellow flag for me for a couple of reasons.
Okay.
First, like, that's not an imaginative way to get people invested in the adventure, right? Like, I realize it's a staple of D&D that you go somewhere, they have a problem, and you are assigned to go solve it. But I feel like but you as a players don't really have much of a stake in what's going on beyond like, well, I guess we want to get paid
Yeah,
solve this
yeah, yeah.
problem, and these people seem nice, so let's solve their problem. So
Mhm.
that's one thing. Whatever, it's a starter set. But man, anytime you have like the equivalent of like a mission briefing in adventure, my
Yep,
experience is that
yep.
that always takes like an hour.
Mhm.
People ask in it encourages people to just like endlessly ask questions of the quest giver or mission giver, and it's like one of my goals is to have as few of these like quest giving briefings
Yeah.
in any role-playing game as I possibly can.
As much as you can avoid that. So like when I ran this, I ran into that exact same problem of like, you and the city it's really interestingly designed in that it's sort of like on a cliff face. So you're sort of like walking up the cliff face and interacting with stuff as you're going until you get to the top, right? And there's I think like the leader of the kobolds is up there. Yeah, it just sort of naturally drives you into this like, we're gonna meet this person, now we're gonna meet this person, now we're gonna get the quest, right? And like we're gonna have to decide what we're gonna do, right? And I think that's smart from a you've never played D&D sort of setup. But I think for you and for your group, I think you want to introduce some probably more dramatic tension, like that zombie attack that's happening on the beach. I might have that happen in the city. So like
Oh,
you
yeah.
come in and it's like the zombies are overrunning the kobolds, and then so like now rather than it being this thing that you can walk away from, it's a what are the adventurers going to do in this situation, right? Are they going
Yeah.
to like avoid, be like, oh great, like everybody's distracted, we're going to ransack the place, or are they going to help out, be heroes, and stuff like that, and then probably just drive directly in from that attack. It's like kind of pick the direction you want them to go, and I would just say like that's the next place you're going to go, and try to short circuit that mission briefing as much as possible.
Yeah.
Because like yeah, it does again, if you've played a game before, it's just not going to be as interesting. And I think you don't have, unless you're going to take 2 hours to really make connections between the NPCs and the players, like they really just want to go out adventuring, they want to go like explore weird
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah, let them do that.
I don't think this is the case, but I feel like this quest giver thing,
Hmm.
and I'll write her right now, I'll put an asterisk and say I know this is present in the earliest iterations of D&D, but it feels very video gamey to me,
Yes, yeah,
right? So you go to someone, they give you a quest, but it works in video games because you can't drag it out for hours, right? Because the video game can control how much time you can waste asking questions of the quest
yeah,
giver,
yeah.
or so in a video game you go and you get your quest, and then you just have to go do the quest. That's the
Yeah,
next thing you
because
do. But
the conversation tree, you've exhausted every possible option, so it's like now
right,
you
yes.
really got to go. They're just repeating themselves. Yeah.
Yes. So but I do get it. And I want to just put a disclaimer here. I understand Stormwreck Isle is like a beginner set for new D&D players. So interpret what I'm saying not as a critique of this product, but just thinking about the adventure, like a good adventure design, generally speaking. Stormwreck Isle does an annoying thing. It's easy to hand wave away, so it's not really a big flaw, but the quest giver is a dragon who's in like inhuman guise, and they
Yeah.
are sending you around this island to deal with level 1 to 2 problems. Like,
Yes.
so
Yes.
if zombies are killing your townspeople,
Yeah.
dragon, like, is there
Is there
can
any
you think
possible
of
way?
yeah
Yeah.
can you think of anyone around here who might be able to trivially deal with whatever
Yeah.
this is? But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so
That
yeah,
reminds me.
the
Oh,
go ahead.
I just like, this is a total anecdote, but I remember running. I think yeah, it was Lost Mines, and I made an offhand comment about like one of the NPCs being like a level 10 fighter who's retired. And like the and the party, because they should have, were like, well, let's recruit him. And I was like, oh no. Yeah. No, he's very retired. Like, yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
we can't introduce this. Yeah.
No, but I get it. And this is a fantasy thing where the wizard that could go over there and solve the problem gives you the quest to do it
Mhm.
yourself, because it's
Yeah.
part of the heroic journey, right?
Yeah.
But so the other thing I was wondering if we could investigate is like, how do you let the players feel like they are figuring out the solution to a problem rather than going to the place the quest giver told them to go, where they will solve the problem, right? So
Yeah.
in this, I mean, there are a million adventures follow this basic format, right? There's like a problem that's plaguing a town or village or whatever. In this case, it's like weird corrupting things are causing chaos around are like disrupting the natural order on this little Stormwreck Isle. How do you, in a situation like that, let the players feel like they are coming up with the solution rather than being told what the solution is, and the solution is to go to places A, B, and C in that order, and just be and clear them? Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that is really hard. And I think, especially the structure of Stormwreck Isle lends itself to, like, you got to go to place A, B, and C to fix it. What I have observed playing these games is that it can be really hard for a party to sort of come up with their drive on their own. And I think this is one of the reasons why I end up liking games like, say, Brindlewood Bay quite a bit, because there's sort of a built-in, like, you are people who are very interested in X, Y, and Z, right? So in Brindlewood Bay's case, it's like, you're a bunch of these, like, old grandmotherly types who just really love mysteries and solving mysteries and murder mysteries and stuff. And there's a murder mystery happening. It's like, well, if I'm going to interact with the game and on any level, then I'm going to want to go do that thing. Like with D&D, I think it can become a little bit harder because it's like, I think people have these different ideas of what their characters are and what their characters might do right away. And like, you can kind of say like, you're heroes, so you're interested in being heroes, but that's almost a little bit too vague of a problem. Like vague of a drive to get going, because it's like, yeah, because it is, then it's like, well, I mean, if I don't really like this quest giver, maybe I'll go find a different quest giver, right, until I can find something that like really interests me as a party. So like, part of the way that I've addressed this is just saying very directly to the players, like, this is the adventure hook, right? And I think we've talked about this on past episodes of the podcast about, like, like, how do you present a problem to to the players without it seeming like, yeah, you're giving them the solution, or like saying like, no, you can't do that, those things. I mean, I think it's just really hard. I mean, I do think, right, like I mentioned with Stormwreck Isle, like, if there's a way that you can kind of take away, like, divert the power of that primary hidden dragon figure to be doing something else. So like they know what the answer is, but if they try to go do it, something else bad is going to happen. Like, I think that's the way that you can maybe start to get around that a little bit. It's like, oh, you have to go to that, like, that cave with all the weird mushrooms, because if I leave, the zombies are going to completely overrun the towns. Like, I mean, maybe you start that adventure with like that leader, it's just like killing wave after wave of zombies, or like holding up some sort of spell, like that's keeping them away or something like that. So it's a lot less of just like like, well, I'm just going to sit here and you go do all the adventure things and then come back to me and report back. Like, it's just like, what are you going to do? I'm just going to sit here, right? So like, yeah.
Well, yeah, I was thinking of doing something similar to that. I was wondering about having that dragon leader be missing. So the zombies are attacking the town or whatever, and the person that usually just goes out and takes care of these problems is gone. So the townspeople are freaked out, and you look like sturdy adventurers. Can you help us? So I've just been trying to look for a way to inject some urgency into urgency, or just interestingness to it, rather than here's your quest giver, she tells you where to go. So
that's a really good idea. And then you could have that leader in whatever that first location is that they're going to end up going. So like this, it could be kind of the quantum leader, right? So it's like, you can maybe choose, like, so if you want to go down to, I think there's like a wrecked ship, there's a mushroom like cave, and I think there's one other location.
Yep, you're correct.
Yeah, so if like the wrecked ship, and that's the direction that the players that I played with ended up going, that wrecked ship has a harpy that kind of comes in and attacks. I mean, you could just have that harpy sort of has like tied up the leader, or like, is, has it ready to eat, eat or something like that. And it's like, so the townsfolk are freaked out because there's these zombies attacking. You can help them kind of get that settled. And then they're like, well, our leader went down 2 days ago to that ship to go do something. We're not even sure what she was doing. Like, can you go help us?
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, so you can either stay here. You don't have a way off the island, so you can stay here and fight zombies, or you can go down and find that leader, or you can go explore around. And like, I think they could take the option of exploring around, but I think if they have two problems to take care of, I think they will end up trying to solve one of them rather than just inventing their own, because they're going to invent their own problems in anyway. But
for sure, yeah. So I will say this about Stormwreck Isle: its locations are pretty neat. The one of them, like you said, is a cave of mushrooms where some myconids live.
Yeah.
That's pretty. I like mushrooms. That's pretty cool. And then a partially sunken ship with zombies and stuff is pretty neat, and not a basement filled with skeletons, right?
Yes, yeah.
That everyone's expecting. So,
Yeah.
can we talk about your first D&D adventure? Well, not yours specifically. So, what should be in that? I feel like we do a disservice to D&D when we play it with this video game type setup of like,
Yeah.
here's your quest to go and do it. I feel like a key part of even your first D&D adventure is bumping into or having the option to like get entangled into side stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's like such a big part of D&D. And I'm not really talking too much about my situation right now because everyone in my family has played D&D, so we know how it's going. So this isn't everyone's first adventure, but it's just
Hmm.
what experiences do you want people to have the first time they sit down at the table
Hmm.
when they play D&D, with the understanding you can't pack every D&D experience into
Yeah.
that first adventure, but what are the key moments or experiences that are just intrinsic to D&D, do you think?
That is a super good question. It's something that I think about quite a lot whenever I'm playing, especially with a new person. Like, like what are the things that I want to make sure that they do? And for me, it's a combination of things. So I think every player needs to be able to use a part of their character that makes their character unique. Like,
Hmm.
so something on their character sheet, like, so if they can cast spells, they need to be able to cast a spell, like in the first hour ideally, if you
Yeah.
can. So it's like, this is what you can do. Like if they're a fighter or a paladin or something, like they need to be able to like hit something really hard. Like, so you gotta, like, I think you need to give them that experience of like, hey, you're playing D&D, there's a bunch of dice, there's a lot of combat, like here's that, right? So you've gotten to do that thing. I think that's super important. But I think the other thing that's important is to do some role playing, but then also give them the ability to like say something dumb or try something that like shouldn't work, but then they can
Hmm.
roll their die. Like they can roll their d20 and they get a really high number, and it's like, oh, actually that did work, right? Like something that like would not pass the smell test in real life, like
Yeah.
it can work in sort of this fantasy role playing setting. Right. I think like those are like the two things that are like the highlights for me about playing that game, especially with new people, of like, oh, like I can just try stuff and like sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Right.
That's a really good point. I really like that. I
Hmm.
really like that, the idea of like a big part of D&D is realizing you can try dumb stuff and it might succeed.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, 'cause it's like the first time that you can like talk your way past a guard, right? It's just like stuff like that, where a video game would just be like, no, you can't go here because it's not, you haven't you haven't flipped the right flag on the logic, right? But like with D&D, it's yeah, you can do those things. Or like, I mean, if they decide that they really like an NPC, I think this is another fun thing to do. It's just like, well, show them at the table and then do this for yourself too, of like, oh, like they're interested in this NPC, like let's start building up like who this person is, and you can even ask them some questions about that as well. I know that's again, for a more like narrative focused game playing side of things, being able to just like ask your players, like, I don't know, you tell me, like, what do you think this person's deal is? But like, yeah, I mean, I think if you can do some of those things, and then they can like again start to invent their own problems or their own kind of success states and stuff. So like maybe they talk to one of the kobolds and they get really invested, and it's like, well, why don't you bring that kobold along with you, right? Like, like
Hmm.
there's just stuff you can do that they might not think about, because if they're used to just playing video games, where the video games will constantly tell you, no, 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 you can't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, whereas D&D, it's a box full of yeses.
Yeah, I like that answer a lot. And I think that really gets to the core of the role playing experience versus, like you say, the video game experiences that everyone is so familiar with.
I don't know, yeah, and I think that to me, I don't know if there's anything else about like first session of D&D in particular that like is that really needs to happen. I don't know. Yeah, is there anything else that you're like, oh, like if the first session of D&D you've played doesn't have this, you missed out on something, like let's make sure we get into the second session.
I'm going to repeat a little bit of what you said, but I think the ability to make your own choices about how to approach a problem is key to me.
Yeah.
And obviously, video games have, there are video games where you can make meaningful choices and stuff, but in D&D, I really think the ability to choose how to approach like an encounter is important. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why in these starter set like adventures, like the encounters that work really well are the ones that don't assume how you are supposed to tackle them, right?
Yes.
And so as I've been going through Stormwreck Isle, the worst type of encounter in these things is one where you like, you read the box text that like locks you into a course of action, So as I
Mm-hmm.
go through the encounters in Stormwreck Isle and other stuff, what I am usually doing is like trying to broaden the like options for the encounter compared to
Yeah,
what
yeah, yeah,
the written adventure assumes. And it's fair of the adventure to assume that if you see zombies, you're going to need to fight them and stuff. But
yeah.
so I get it. But, like you say, maybe if you back off a little bit on your prescribing how encounters will go, I think that's like an important lesson for players that
Mm-hmm.
the game itself holds no assumptions about how you will approach this situation. In this particular case, I don't know if there's really enough in Stormwreck Isle to explore that too thoroughly, but I will be looking for opportunities to step back from the combat that the adventure assumes that the PCs will be engaging in.
That's a good point. I mean, I think there's a big difference between setting up a scenario where it's like, you turn the corner and there's a bunch of thieves that have their swords drawn on you, like ready to attack, versus like you turn the corner and there's a bunch of thieves playing cards at the table. You can see how those situations could very easily diverge. Both could end up with combat. One is very much more likely going to end up with combat.
Yeah.
Same thing with zombies. I mean, you could add something in there like that they can't climb up rocks or something like that. It's like, and have some rocks available to them that they could create a wall, or like like they're attracted to, I don't know, they're attracted to seaweed for some reason, so you can like lead them away
Yeah.
somewhere else, right? Like you can just like you can build in all these like little ways to solve the problem. Or, and this is like just cribbing fully from John Corey of Splatbook, like just don't even know what the solution is, but just kind of present the problem, and sort of like whatever they come up with, right, is great. I kind of make that work for them, so they can feel clever and you can be surprised.
Yeah. I will say, generally speaking, about thinking of starter D&D adventures, I don't like thinking about like missions and quests in D&D. I know
Yeah.
that the idea of the quest is very baked into kind of fantasy literature that D&D draws from, but for me, the D&D experience is going out and exploring weird and dangerous stuff. A strong element of that is just simply the thrill of exploration and
Mm.
figuring out and discovering what's there. And like a more fun version of Stormwreck Isle is you wash up on the shore of this island and that's all you know. Like
Mm-hmm.
go find out what's on this island. Whereas, as written, it's like you sail, you arrive at the main city and you get your quests of locations to go visit on this island.
Yeah.
And I understand why they're doing it that way, but why not have the PCs not know what's on the island or where
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
going, right? I feel like I would rather the PCs go bumble out into the world and then some kind of story emerges from the things they discover and the way that they interact with those things,
Yeah.
rather than kind of imposing from the outset the way you're going to be interacting with this setting. Does that make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it sounds like you need to just play a hex crawl with
Yes.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think that's totally valid. For me, that's a pretty ideal way to play as well. I don't know if I'll ever have the group or the time to necessarily do that. And I think that's the key there, is if you have the right group and you have the time to sort of find the adventure together, then I think, yeah, that's going to be way more satisfying. You could end up playing Stormwreck Isle, but if they get there naturally, kind of by their own decisions, then I think that's, yeah, much more interesting and much more fun. It's just sort of hard, like how do you pull that off if you have a limited amount of time?
For sure. Like I feel like a broader issue floating be kind of looming in the background for me is, as hobbyists who love this hobby and who really want to evangelize it and welcome new people into the hobby, I feel like our collective instinct, and it's reflected in products like Stormwreck Isle, is to just strip down, try to make it more accessible,
Mm-hmm.
try to make it really accessible and simple. And I sometimes wonder if people might not find more value in being tossed into the deep end a little bit more.
Interesting. Okay.
If you're going to sit down and spend 3 hours playing D&D, let's play D&D, right?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Let's do it. And so I absolutely understand. It's probably the right thing to do in these starter sets to present these, very simple, very accessible, very easy to grasp scenarios. But that's not really what D&D is or role playing is, right? Like that's not the experience that makes this hobby so amazing. That's not the
Hmm.
experience you want to share with other people. To me, the way you convince people to get invested in D&D is to share what D&D does best, right? Or what fill in, whatever
Yeah.
role-playing game you have.
Yeah.
And what it does best is not really there's a cave of kobolds, go there and you'll get 100 gold pieces if you defeat them.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you express that in a quote starter set, but I don't know. I guess maybe what I'm arguing for is, let's trust that people can rise to the challenge of a weirder and more nuanced and deeper experience.
Hmm.
I don't know. How do you feel about that? You're giving a dubious look into your webcam.
Yeah,
So
I've got a lot of, yeah, I think you've probably seen a lot of different expressions.
yes,
I
yeah,
think
you
you are.
did go through a journey of emotional
Yes. Yeah,
expressions. By the way.
it was a lot. It started with like, I can't believe this old guy is talking about how D&D used to be. And everyone,
Yeah,
okay, he's got a point. Yeah, so it is, I do think there is a little bit of like rose-colored glasses here where like you are sort of remembering some formative experiences that like were impactful for you, right? That like may or may not represent like how people want to play D&D now. So I think there's an element of that, but I do think that you are right on that. Like if we sort of end up treating these games, and it just speaking more broadly than D&D, as like as purely a way to play a video game at the table, or like a way just to tell stories or something like that, like we have lost something.
yeah,
I think you're right on there. I mean, like I played in like one hex crawl that Kyle Latino ran. So he made a big map and he had a bunch of like stuff that could happen in dice that he was rolling and stuff. And it was a really fun experience. It also meant that a little bit like we were sort of like trying to find the adventure like all together, and like I think
yep,
that worked really well for that group, the group that we were playing with, because I think like we all like were able to do that. Like I do just wonder, it's like if you throw people that have never played before into like a big complicated system, and then also ask them to tell a story and interact with a game in a way that it's very foreign to I think how we do any sort of like media these days. Like, yeah, I wonder how effective that would be. Although it also sounds pretty exciting to see like, okay, like what if very first time you're ever playing D&D, it is a hex crawl. Like you've rolled up your characters, maybe you start in a town or like a tavern or something like that, but then otherwise it's just like, I don't know, let's see what happens.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something really exciting about that. Like really, really exciting about that. Yeah, I'd be curious to see how it would go though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me respond to that. So, my intent in that disjointed monologue was not to say that like we all need to be playing hex crawls the way Gary played them back in the
Yeah.
day. It was
Yeah.
more like whatever the best part of D&D is, let's turn on the fire hose. Like let's invite people to the best part of it,
Yeah.
not to a really stripped down version of it. So maybe the best part of D&D, if you're relatively new fan of D&D, is like a critical role style, deep, emotionally invested storylines where the experience is very much built around your relationship with the other people at the other characters that you're adventuring with. And so for me, I'm more of a give me a hex crawl, but like I understand that for other people the meat of D&D is in that more these strong storylines that are kind of deeply rooted in personal motivations or personal failures or desires or whatever. So
Hmm.
where is the D&D starter adventure that like does that,
Yeah.
right? Like so we don't need a hex crawl. Maybe we need something that like throws you into the deep end of like you're a participant in this story. You have these deep connections to other participants in the story. Go
Hmm.
crazy. Like, why? I understand why Stormwreck Isle isn't an old school hex crawl. Why isn't
Yeah.
it a Critical Role style, I don't know, narrative theater? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, I think there are some motions towards this with some of their pre-gens, like they giving them bonds and stuff like that. But I mean, I think you are onto something there with like why not flesh it out like a lot more? So it's like you have this character that has a big backstory, has all these connections, has the drive, like all that sort of stuff. And I mean, I think they're like Lost Minds has a little bit of that, but I mean, I think you're onto something that like there could be more of that, especially if that's how most people are coming to the game. Like just giving it to them up front, and it's like here's an example of how you could put all that together, and then like the next time that you're playing, like maybe you keep going with those characters, or maybe you invent your own, and like here's the template for how to do that. Like with D&D in particular, like I am sensitive to the fact that they are trying to make a game that works for so many different styles of play sort of all at once. I mean, I think there's a mentality of like, like this is how we want the game to be played. That I think they're trying to get out there, but like they're also trying to make sure that it can work. It can work for so many
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
many different people. So it's like, like I don't begrudge the fact that like Stormwreck Isle is maybe a little bit thin, but I do think you're right that there's ways to write that adventure where there are different ways to run it. I think like in like almost different complexities to run it or in different styles as well. So it's like, you could almost have a like, hey, is your party more interested in narrative? Like here's a bunch more text on that. If they're more interested in combat, like here's a bunch of optional encounters and stuff. Right. Like I think there's ways to like, make moves towards that. Where even in the written adventure, I mean, I think it's like, again, you get to invent it. Your D&D is the D&D that you play at the table. It's not what Wizards of the Coast has written written in the adventure, but it's like, yeah, I mean, I think there are ways to facilitate that I think they're not taking. Like you're right on there.
I don't mean to keep beating the dead horse, but
Yeah.
I feel that as a hobby, so I'm enough of a dork that I own like a huge number of like introductory games and
Yeah.
starter sets for different systems and stuff. And this feels to me like a challenge the hobby and the industry has not really cracked. What is the introductory experience that is going to get you hooked on this? I think we can point at products that have worked and we can point at products that have not worked, but I don't know that it's always clear exactly what the lessons are to draw from those things, right? Like
Yeah.
Fandelver is really well regarded. I don't think Stormic Isle is fine, but no one is creating memories of the time they played through Stormwreck Isle the way they did when they played through Fandelver, or
Yeah.
40 years ago when they played through the Caves of Chaos or whatever the
Yeah.
other like kind of starter stuff was back in the early days of D&D. So I'm just rambling at this point. Starter adventures, they're hard to figure out. I think it's really hard to create one product that introduces you to a hobby that is frankly draws strength from the diversity of experiences that you can have in it.
Hmm.
And I guess I can't blame Stormwreck Isle or anyone else for not creating the perfect product that appeals to everyone, right?
Yeah, we need to wrap it up, but like one thing I have, and maybe we should do a full podcast about this, is like I would argue that those starter sets and those starter boxes and stuff should be treated as the only way the game ever gets played. Because I think for the
Hmm.
vast majority of people who play it, that is the entirety of their experience with playing like Dungeons and Dragons. Is I went through the starter set that one time, right? Yeah, and I think that's true for a lot of games, or a lot of games, and then especially for like even a lot of these like narrative games that we play and stuff. Like I think like a lot of people say like with Brindlewood Bay, they're only ever going to play one mystery. So it's like if you think about it in those terms, or yeah, like if this is the only time that you're ever going to play this game, exactly what you're saying. Like what are the things that it should do really well? Like should it assume that you're ever going to play another game of this? Like
Hmm.
if not, then you're going to write that very differently, because it's like, okay, well then if you're never going to play again, like maybe we want to accelerate you from level 1 through 20 super fast, so you get a taste of all that, or
Yeah.
it doesn't matter, like, or like right. So there's like all these decisions that I think you could make with like if you were going to treat that as like this is the only time that someone's going to play, or the only time this group is going to play together is when we go through this like starter set. Like I think that would lead to some different decisions that I think a lot of game designers end up making. And when I say game designers, like I'm including myself in that, of like even how I would run the game as well. Like, yeah, thinking it through that way. Like, yeah, because that's just the reality of it, is like, groups fall apart all the time for various reasons. And it's like, well, yeah, like, so if you treated it as this is it, like you would approach it differently.
Yeah, why? Where's the level 10 starter set, right? Where's the starter set that like gives you accomplished seasoned adventurers that are like gonna save the kingdom, not clear out the rats from the basement in the tavern, right?
Yeah, it's probably languishing on on DM's Guild somewhere. Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we need to stop, otherwise we'll keep on inventing reasons to keep talking. So,
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been a super good conversation. I'm really glad to talk to you again, Andy. It's been too long. I'm glad we can kind of dive back into.
It has been too long.
Yes. Yeah. So we're Andy and I are talking a little bit about what we're going to do for 2024 and beyond. So I guess stay tuned to that. Not going to be a major format change or anything like that, but I think we're going to have some tweaks to roll for topic coming up. So yeah, please keep listening to us. Yeah, I think that about does it. So I'll start doing our wrap up stuff, unless you have anything else you wanted to mention.
I was just going to throw a very fast question that's not meant to start a big conversation, but I'm curious, do you have a gaming goal, a GMing goal this year that you definitely know that you want to pursue?
Ooh, that is a good question. That is something I'm still thinking about, but I do think, I know I want to run something. I'm still trying to decide what exactly that is. I'm personally kind of interested in the MCDM TTRPG of heroic, of cinematic fantasy, or what, like they need to get a name quickly. But there's something about a lot of the little things I've heard about that makes me kind of excited to maybe try to run something like that. Although I'm trying to decide if I need to wait for the book to come out, or if I can do the PDF. Right? So there's some of that stuff, and then I've got like a couple other things kicking around. I think I'd like to run a little bit more Brindlewood Bay as well, because that was super fun. And actually some more Mouse Ritter. So we ran Mouse Ritter for the actual play. Like that was a fun system. I'd like to like keep playing that a bit. And then the last thing I've been thinking about is playing some more like 1-page RPGs. Like I really like those every time I play them, to like kind of in and out, get to try like a small system really fast, that isn't too hard to get your mind around. So that's sort of where my head's at. What about you?
I think my biggest goal, so I've been running Masks of Nyarlathotep for members of my family for a while now, and the kind of final couple months of the year, that campaign sort of stalled out. So I need to, maybe we can talk about this in the future episode. How do you kind of reignite a campaign that was going well, but sort of foundered for different reasons? So I am optimistic about that. So because there's enthusiasm for the players, I get asked about it by my family members on a regular basis. When are we going to continue? So
that's great.
I want to get that kickstarted. And last year I pitched Curse of Strahd to my main gaming group, and it didn't work with their schedules and availability and levels of interest. And I would like to find a way to make Curse of Strahd or something like it happen, a 0 to hero fantasy, whether it's D&D or something similar. I would like to do a 0 to hero D&D-ish thing this year. So it would be fun if it's Curse of Strahd, because I like Curse of Strahd a lot. I'd be excited to run that, but I'd be also happy to run something else. But I would like to get some like swords and sorcery action going this year. So I'll be looking for ways to do that. And let's plan on talking about in a future episode, like, how do you negotiate with your group? What kind of experience you want to have? How do you negotiate that given the constraints that all of these adults with children have in their lives? So those will be my goals. Restart, get Masks of Nyarlathotep going again, and do a D&D.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's a good year for horror and swords. or horror and swords.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, Roll for Topic is part of the Roll for It Media podcasting network. Our sister show, The Splat Book, with John Corey and Kyle Latino, is wonderful as always. I think, we talked a little bit about their recent episodes. Definitely go listen to Andy on the most, I think the last 2 episodes. I'm a couple behind right now.
It's alarming. Yeah, the most recent one, as of the time of this recording, is I was on there with John Corey and Matt Wilson, and we were talking about the kind of baroque, overcomplicated game systems that formed sort of the second generation of RPGs after D&D. So
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
if you have any curiosity about Rollmaster, Champions, GURPS, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
we are a bunch of nerds who like that stuff. So go listen to that episode.
Yes, a bunch of I will also say a bunch of history nerds too. So that I'm I'm guessing that is a more well researched podcast than I will ever be a part of. So yeah, I'll definitely give that one a listen. So yeah, I think that is all that I needed to say. Yeah. So again, thank you so much for listening. I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.